Your soulmate just found out what you sacrificed in silence for this connection, and they're shocked. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this right now. Before you move on, give yourself these next few moments. Sometimes a message doesn't arrive because it's trying to predict your future. Sometimes it arrives because it speaks to something your heart has been carrying in silence. If you've been wondering whether the love you gave, the patience you showed, or the sacrifices you made without asking for recognition truly mattered, then stay with me. Listen to this. You may not have all the answers today, but perhaps these words will help you see your story from a different perspective. There are seasons when it feels like no one notices what you're carrying. You smile while your heart is breaking. You encourage other people while quietly fighting your own battles. You keep showing kindness even when you don't receive the same energy back. And after a while, you begin asking yourself questions you never thought you would ask. Did any of it matter? Did anyone ever see what I gave? Was I simply loving someone who never understood me? If those questions have been living in your heart, don't scroll, because this message is for you. Listen to this. There are moments in life when people begin seeing the past through completely different eyes. It doesn't always happen overnight. It doesn't happen because someone forces them to understand. It happens because experience changes perspective. One day they wake up, and memories that once felt ordinary suddenly feel meaningful. Conversations they barely remembered now echo inside their mind. Small acts of kindness they once overlooked begin standing out in ways they never expected. It's almost as if life quietly hands them a new pair of glasses, allowing them to see what was always there. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. Perhaps you've looked back at someone from your own past and realized they cared far more deeply than you understood at the time. Growth has a way of revealing truths that immaturity often hides. That's why your story may not be as invisible as it feels today. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this right now. Think about everything you carried without telling anyone. Think about the nights you stayed awake replaying conversations. Think about the mornings when you had to pretend you were fine because life didn't pause just because your heart was hurting. Think about every time you chose understanding instead of anger, every time you wished someone well even though they had disappointed you, every moment you resisted becoming bitter because you didn't want pain to change who you were. Those moments rarely receive applause. No audience claps for silent courage. No headlines celebrate quiet resilience. Yet those moments shape you more than the world ever sees. They become part of your character, part of your strength, part of the person you're slowly becoming. Listen to this. If you've been noticing repeating numbers like 111, 222, 333, or 444, you might see them as gentle reminders to pause and reflect. Many people find comfort in treating these moments as invitations to slow down and pay attention to what is happening within themselves. Maybe 111 reminds you that fresh beginnings are possible. Maybe 222 encourages patience when life feels uncertain. Maybe 333 nudges you toward personal growth. Maybe 444 helps you remember that stability often begins inside your own heart before it appears anywhere else. Whether those numbers feel spiritually meaningful to you or simply encourage mindfulness, they can become beautiful reminders that every chapter has something to teach you. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Sometimes the biggest sign isn't outside of you. Sometimes it's the quiet strength growing inside you while you continue moving forward. Don't scroll, because there is something many people never realize until much later. Genuine love often leaves a lasting impression even when it isn't fully appreciated in the moment. People may forget specific words. They may forget dates, places, or conversations. But they rarely forget how someone consistently made them feel. If you made someone feel safe during a difficult season, if you encouraged them when they doubted themselves, if you believed in them when they struggled to believe in themselves, those experiences can stay hidden beneath everyday life until something unexpectedly brings them back to the surface. A familiar song. A shared memory. A quiet evening with nothing but their own thoughts. Suddenly, they begin replaying moments they hadn't considered in years. And what once seemed ordinary begins carrying entirely new meaning. Listen to this. Maybe you've been telling yourself that because you walked away quietly, your love must have been forgotten. Maybe you've convinced yourself that silence means your presence never mattered. But silence can tell powerful stories. Sometimes walking away peacefully speaks louder than staying in constant conflict. Sometimes choosing dignity instead of revenge leaves a deeper impression than endless arguments ever could. It doesn't guarantee how another person will respond. Life doesn't make promises like that. But it does allow space for reflection. It allows people to grow. It allows perspective to change. And sometimes that change begins long after everyone assumes the story is over. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this reminder today. Your value has never been determined by another person's timing. Read that again. Your value has never depended on whether someone recognized your heart at the exact moment you hoped they would. People notice things at different stages of life. Some appreciate kindness immediately. Others only understand it after experiencing disappointment elsewhere. Some recognize loyalty while they still have it. Others only realize its importance after it's gone. That difference says more about where they are in their journey than it does about your worth. Don't let delayed appreciation convince you that your love lacked value. Listen to this. There is incredible strength in remaining true to yourself during seasons of uncertainty. Anyone can love when everything feels easy. Anyone can stay hopeful when life is unfolding exactly as planned. But it takes real courage to continue choosing compassion while carrying disappointment. It takes emotional maturity to protect your peace without closing your heart forever. It takes wisdom to recognize that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness simply means refusing to let yesterday control tomorrow. If you've been doing that work quietly, give yourself more credit than you have been giving. Healing often happens so gradually that we fail to notice how far we've come. Don't scroll. Because this message is for anyone who's been questioning whether the universe, life, or even their own heart has forgotten them. Listen carefully. Growth is rarely loud. It doesn't always arrive with dramatic announcements. Most of the time, it happens in ordinary moments. You respond differently to a familiar trigger. You sleep peacefully after weeks of restless nights. You realize you haven't checked your phone every 5 minutes. You notice you're smiling without forcing it. Those tiny moments often reveal that healing has already begun, even before you recognize it yourself. Never underestimate quiet progress. Quiet progress changes lives. Listen to this. Imagine someone sitting alone after a long day. The house is quiet. The television is off. Their phone is finally put away. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, there are no distractions. Just thoughts. Just memories. Just honesty. They begin remembering conversations they once dismissed. They remember someone who consistently offered encouragement without expecting anything back. They remember patience. They remember loyalty. They remember feeling understood. And slowly, almost without realizing it, gratitude begins replacing indifference. Reflection begins replacing assumption. Maturity begins replacing impulsiveness. That's one of life's most remarkable qualities. Perspective can change when people finally become willing to sit with themselves. Don't scroll. Because your heart needs this right now. Whether someone from your past eventually reaches out or not, the deeper truth remains the same. Every quiet sacrifice you've made has shaped you. Every difficult decision has strengthened you. Every tear has taught you something about your own resilience. You are not the same person you were when this journey began. You are wiser. More compassionate. More discerning. You have learned that love without self-respect eventually becomes exhaustion. You have learned that patience should never require abandoning yourself. You have learned that hope and healthy boundaries can exist together. Those lessons are priceless. Listen to this, your story isn't finished. The chapter you're living today doesn't have to define the ending. Life has a remarkable way of surprising people who continue investing in their own growth instead of remaining trapped in yesterday's pain. Maybe new conversations will happen. Maybe old misunderstandings will finally become clear. Maybe entirely new relationships will enter your life and show you a kind of peace you've never experienced before. No one can promise exactly how your future will unfold, but one thing is certain: the person you're becoming is far more important than the version of yourself who first entered this story. Don't scroll, because before this part ends, there's one more thought your heart may need to hear. If someone truly begins looking back with new understanding, the first thing they often notice isn't the words you said. It's everything you never demanded credit for. They remember the grace, the consistency, the quiet strength, the way you chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier. And sometimes that realization arrives so unexpectedly that it leaves them sitting in complete silence, wondering how they failed to recognize such a rare kind of love when it was right in front of them. Listen to this, because what happens next isn't really about whether someone finally understands your sacrifices. It's about what those sacrifices have quietly built inside you. They have shaped a stronger heart, a wiser mind, and a deeper sense of peace. And as this journey continues, you're about to discover something even more powerful than another person's changing perspective. You're about to realize just how much you've changed yourself, and that revelation may become the turning point that changes everything. They can't stop replaying your energy in their mind. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this right now. There are moments in life when someone finally becomes quiet enough to hear the thoughts they've been running from for a very long time. No distractions. No endless notifications. No crowded rooms. Just silence. And it's often in that silence that memories begin returning, not because anyone invited them back, but because the heart has a way of bringing unfinished emotions to the surface. If you've ever wondered whether someone who once overlooked your kindness could one day see it differently, listen to this. Perspective has a strange way of changing when people grow. What once felt ordinary can suddenly become unforgettable. What once seemed small can suddenly become everything. Listen to this. Imagine someone driving home after a long day, expecting it to be just another evening, when a familiar song begins playing through the speakers. It's a song they haven't heard in months, maybe even years. Suddenly, without warning, they're no longer focused on the road ahead. Their mind drifts back to a conversation they had with you. They remember your smile. They remember the calmness in your voice. They remember the way you encouraged them during a season when they couldn't even encourage themselves. Funny how memories work. They don't always arrive when we ask for them. Sometimes they arrive exactly when we're finally ready to understand them. Don't scroll, because this message is for you if you've been wondering whether your quiet love disappeared into the past. The truth is, genuine kindness has a way of leaving fingerprints on people's hearts. They may not notice them immediately. Life gets busy. Priorities shift. Emotions become complicated. But eventually, when everything slows down, those fingerprints remain. They remind people that someone once believed in them without expecting perfection. Someone once stood beside them without demanding applause. Someone once offered peace instead of pressure. Those kinds of memories don't fade easily. Listen to this. Maybe you've spent too much time believing that because you didn't fight for attention, you became forgettable. Maybe you've wondered if walking away with grace made it seem like you never cared at all. But quiet love often carries the deepest impact. It doesn't need constant validation to be real. It doesn't announce itself every day. Instead, it becomes part of another person's story in ways neither of you fully understand at the time. Months later, sometimes even years later, they begin recognizing moments they once took for granted. Not because the past changed, but because they did. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this reminder today. There is a difference between being unnoticed and being unappreciated in the moment. Those two things are not the same. Sometimes people genuinely fail to recognize what they have because they haven't yet experienced enough life to understand its value. They mistake consistency for something ordinary. They confuse loyalty with something they'll always be able to find again. They assume kindness will always be waiting. But life has a remarkable way of teaching lessons through reflection. And reflection often begins long after people believe the chapter has ended. Listen to this. Perhaps you've been noticing little moments lately that encourage you to slow down. Maybe you keep seeing repeating numbers like 111 or 222. Maybe you find yourself thinking about growth more than fear. Maybe you're spending less time asking, "Why did this happen?" and more time asking, "What has this experience taught me?" Whether you see these moments as spiritual reminders, meaningful coincidences, or simply invitations to reflect, they can help you reconnect with yourself. They encourage you to stop measuring your worth by someone else's understanding and start recognizing your own quiet strength. Don't scroll, because something beautiful happens when healing begins. At first, it doesn't feel dramatic. You simply notice you're breathing a little easier. You're smiling a little more. You're no longer checking your phone every few minutes hoping for a message that may never arrive. You begin enjoying your own company again. You rediscover hobbies you forgot you loved. You reconnect with family and friends. Little by little, your world becomes larger than the pain you once carried. That's one of the greatest gifts healing offers. It doesn't erase the past. It simply refuses to let the past control every tomorrow. Listen to this. While you're becoming stronger, someone else may also be changing in ways you cannot see. Growth rarely announces itself. People don't wake up one morning completely transformed. Instead, change happens through countless quiet moments. A difficult conversation teaches humility. A disappointment creates empathy. A mistake becomes a lesson. A lonely evening encourages honest reflection. Slowly, almost without realizing it, they begin seeing life differently. They begin asking questions they never thought to ask before. They begin wondering whether they misunderstood people who genuinely cared about them. Don't scroll, because this part matters more than you think. Imagine someone remembering not your grand gestures, but your smallest ones. They remember the way you checked in when they were having a hard day. They remember the patience you showed when they were confused. They remember the encouragement you offered when they doubted themselves. Those moments may have seemed ordinary to you. But to someone looking back with new perspective, they suddenly become extraordinary. That's how gratitude often works. It notices yesterday through today's wisdom. Listen to this. One of the hardest lessons life teaches is that timing influences understanding. Sometimes people meet incredible individuals before they're emotionally prepared to appreciate them. Sometimes they only understand love after experiencing loss. Sometimes they only recognize loyalty after facing disappointment. These lessons aren't easy, and they don't excuse poor choices, but they do explain why perspective can change so dramatically over time. Human beings continue growing, and with growth often comes a deeper appreciation for things they once overlooked. Don't scroll, because your heart deserves to hear this. If you've been carrying guilt for loving deeply, please let some of that weight go. Loving sincerely is never something you need to apologize for. Being compassionate isn't a mistake. Being patient isn't weakness. Choosing grace instead of bitterness doesn't make you foolish. Those qualities reflect your character. They become part of the person you're building every single day. Whether someone else recognizes them immediately or years from now, they remain valuable because they belong to you. Listen to this. Perhaps you've been asking yourself whether closure always requires another conversation. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes closure begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to explain your value. It begins when you recognize that your kindness was real even if it wasn't fully understood. It begins when you realize your peace matters just as much as your hope. That kind of clarity changes everything because it allows you to move forward without carrying resentment. Don't scroll, because there is another truth your heart needs today. The more you focus on becoming the healthiest version of yourself, the less your happiness depends on outcomes you cannot control. You stop trying to force answers. You stop chasing certainty. Instead, you begin trusting your own growth. You become more intentional with your energy. You choose relationships that feel safe instead of confusing. You protect your peace without closing your heart. That balance doesn't happen overnight, but once it begins, life starts feeling lighter. Listen to this. Maybe the most surprising part of this journey isn't that someone could eventually look back with appreciation. Maybe the biggest surprise is that you'll reach a point where you no longer need that appreciation to know your worth. Imagine waking up one morning and feeling genuinely grateful for the person you've become because of everything you've survived. Imagine recognizing your own resilience before anyone else does. Imagine discovering that peace can exist even while certain questions remain unanswered. That's real transformation. Don't scroll, because before we finish this chapter, there's one more thing you need to hear. Life has a way of bringing clarity to people when they least expect it. Sometimes that clarity inspires new conversations. Sometimes it simply brings quiet gratitude. Sometimes it encourages people to become better versions of themselves because they finally understand what genuine kindness looked like. Whatever form that understanding takes, never forget this: the love you gave shaped you into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than you were before. Here's the secret they never wanted to admit. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this right now. There comes a moment in every unforgettable connection when the truth becomes louder than the excuses. For the longest time, they convinced themselves they had everything figured out. They told themselves they were making the right decisions. They believed distance would make the emotions disappear. They assumed enough time would erase the memories. But life has a remarkable way of proving that some feelings don't disappear simply because we stop talking about them. Instead, they settle quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the day we're finally honest enough to face them. If you've ever cared deeply for someone while wondering whether they truly understood your heart, listen to this. Sometimes understanding arrives much later than expected, and when it does, it changes everything. Listen to this. Imagine someone who spent months filling every empty moment with distractions. Work became busier. Their schedule became fuller. Their phone was always in their hand. Music played constantly. Television stayed on in the background. Friends kept them occupied. Yet despite all the noise, there were still brief moments when everything became unexpectedly quiet. Those moments were the hardest because they couldn't outrun their own thoughts anymore. They started remembering the conversations they once dismissed. They remembered your patience when they were overwhelmed. They remembered your calmness during moments when they brought confusion. Those memories no longer felt ordinary. They felt significant. They began asking themselves questions they had avoided for a long time. Why did someone care about me that deeply? Why didn't I understand it then? Why does it suddenly feel so important now? Don't scroll. Because this message is for anyone who has ever believed their love went unnoticed. One of the greatest misconceptions people carry is believing that immediate recognition is the only kind that matters. It isn't. Sometimes appreciation takes time because people are still learning who they are. They're still discovering what truly matters. They confuse excitement with stability. They mistake unpredictability for passion. They chase what is temporary while overlooking what is consistent. Only after experiencing enough life do they begin recognizing the difference. That's when they start looking back, not with the same eyes they once had, but with a deeper understanding shaped by experience. Listen to this. Perhaps you've spent too much energy wondering whether someone regrets the way things unfolded. The reality is that every person reflects differently. Some people ignore the past. Others revisit it with honesty. What matters most isn't whether another person reaches a particular conclusion. What matters is recognizing that your kindness, patience, and integrity remain valuable regardless of how quickly someone else understands them. That's a truth worth holding on to because it protects your peace. It reminds you that your character isn't dependent on someone else's timeline. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this reminder today. Growth has a way of revealing things that pride once kept hidden. When people become more emotionally mature, they begin recognizing moments where fear influenced their choices. They see conversations they handled poorly. They notice opportunities they let slip away. They realize they were protecting themselves from vulnerability instead of opening themselves to genuine connection. Those realizations don't erase the past, but they often inspire people to become more thoughtful, more compassionate, and more intentional in the future. Listen to this. Maybe you've noticed your own perspective changing too. Perhaps the questions you ask today are different from the ones you asked a year ago. Instead of wondering, "Why wasn't I enough?" you're beginning to ask, "What kind of relationship truly brings out the best in me?" Instead of chasing explanations, you're becoming curious about your own healing. Instead of measuring your worth through another person's attention, you're learning to appreciate the qualities that make you who you are. That's not giving up. That's growing. That's choosing yourself without becoming closed off to love. Don't scroll, because something powerful happens when we stop romanticizing pain. For a long time, you may have believed that suffering proved the depth of your feelings. But genuine love doesn't require you to lose yourself. It encourages honesty, respect, emotional safety, and mutual effort. As you continue healing, you become less attracted to confusion and more drawn toward clarity. You begin recognizing that peace isn't boring. Stability isn't ordinary. Consistency isn't something to overlook. Those qualities become the foundation for healthier connections, whether with someone from your past or someone entirely new. Listen to this. Think about how often life teaches its biggest lessons through contrast. Sometimes people only recognize loyalty after experiencing inconsistency. They only appreciate honesty after encountering deception. They only understand emotional safety after feeling emotionally exhausted elsewhere. These experiences don't guarantee any specific outcome, but they often reshape the way someone values the people who have crossed their path. Reflection has a way of highlighting what truly mattered all along. Don't scroll, because your heart deserves to hear this. If you've been carrying disappointment, don't let it convince you that your story is finished. Every difficult season carries lessons that prepare you for what comes next. Maybe you've become better at setting boundaries. Maybe you've learned to communicate more openly. Maybe you've discovered strengths you never knew you possessed. Those changes are meaningful because they belong to you. No one can take them away. Listen to this. Sometimes people imagine closure as one dramatic conversation where every question receives an answer. Real life is often quieter than that. Closure can begin through acceptance. It can grow through self-respect. It can arrive when you stop waiting for someone else to define your value. That kind of peace isn't dramatic, but it's incredibly freeing. It allows you to move forward without carrying resentment, even if some questions remain unanswered. Don't scroll, because here's the part many people overlook. The more you invest in your own growth, the more your energy naturally changes. You become calmer, more confident, more intentional. You stop trying to convince people to recognize your worth because you already know it. That quiet confidence influences every area of your life. It changes the conversations you have. It changes the relationships you choose. It changes the way you see yourself. That's the kind of transformation that lasts. Listen to this. There is no way to rewrite yesterday, but there is always an opportunity to write tomorrow differently. Whether someone from your past gains new understanding or not, you still have the ability to choose what kind of future you want to build. You can choose honesty over assumptions. You can choose peace over constant uncertainty. You can choose relationships that reflect the respect, kindness, and care you know you deserve. Those choices are powerful because they're within your control. Don't scroll, because before this chapter ends, remember this one truth above everything else: the quiet sacrifices you made were never meaningless simply because they weren't immediately recognized. They helped shape your resilience, your compassion, and your wisdom. Those qualities will continue to influence every meaningful relationship you build from this point forward. Listen to this, because the next chapter isn't about looking backward. It's about what happens when clarity replaces confusion, when both hearts have learned valuable lessons, and when the future begins asking entirely new questions instead of repeating old ones. That's where the story is heading next. The truth they've been hiding from themselves is becoming impossible to ignore. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this right now. There comes a point in every unforgettable connection when pretending becomes more exhausting than telling the truth. For a long time, they believed they could lock certain emotions away and simply move on. They buried themselves in responsibilities. They convinced themselves they were over everything. They smiled when people asked if they were doing okay. They acted as though the chapter had closed. But the heart has a way of remembering what the mind tries so desperately to forget. Every time life became quiet, every time the noise disappeared, they found themselves thinking about the one person who loved them without trying to change them. Listen to this: some truths don't disappear just because we avoid them. They simply wait until we're strong enough to face them. Listen to this: imagine someone sitting by themselves late at night. The television is on, but they aren't really watching it. Their phone is in their hand, but they aren't reading anything. Their thoughts keep drifting somewhere they never planned to go. They remember the conversations that once seemed ordinary. They remember your patience when they were confused. They remember the way you listened without rushing to judge. They remember how safe it felt to be understood instead of criticized. Those memories begin arriving one after another, almost like pages from a book they thought had already been closed. And for the first time in a very long time, they stop pushing those memories away. Don't scroll, because this message is for anyone who has ever wondered if genuine kindness leaves a lasting impression. It does. Not always immediately. Not always in the way we expect. But people remember how they felt around someone who offered peace instead of pressure. They remember the person who celebrated their victories without jealousy. They remember the one who stayed calm when life became overwhelming. They remember the one who chose understanding instead of making everything into a competition. Those memories often become more valuable with time because maturity changes what people admire. Listen to this. Perhaps you've spent too much energy asking why everything unfolded the way it did. Maybe you've replayed old conversations so many times that you can practically hear every word. Maybe you've wondered if saying one different sentence could have changed everything. But here's something your heart may need today. Growth doesn't happen by living inside old conversations forever. Growth happens when you carry the lessons forward without carrying the weight of endless regret. You cannot rewrite yesterday, but you can allow yesterday to shape someone wiser, calmer, and stronger. Don't scroll, because your heart needs this reminder. One of the greatest signs of emotional healing is when you stop chasing explanations that may never come. There was a time when every unanswered question felt unbearable. Every silence seemed personal. Every delay felt like rejection. But slowly, something changed inside you. You began understanding that peace cannot depend on another person's ability to explain themselves. Peace begins the moment you stop placing your future in the hands of answers you cannot control. Listen to this. While you've been learning those lessons, someone else may have been learning lessons of their own. Life has a remarkable way of humbling people. It teaches through unexpected disappointments. It teaches through missed opportunities. It teaches through relationships that reveal uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Sometimes people don't realize what genuine loyalty looked like until they experience inconsistency elsewhere. Sometimes they don't recognize emotional safety until they encounter emotional chaos. Contrast has a way of creating clarity. Don't scroll, because this part matters more than you realize. Think about everything you've overcome since this journey began. You're not the same person who first entered this chapter. Back then, uncertainty consumed your thoughts. You questioned your value far more often than you should have. You looked for reassurance outside yourself because you hadn't yet discovered the quiet confidence waiting within you. But look at yourself now. You've survived days you thought would break you. You've continued moving forward even when your heart felt heavy. You've learned that strength doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes strength is simply getting out of bed and choosing hope one more time. Listen to this. Perhaps that's why your energy feels different lately. You're no longer trying to convince people to stay. You're no longer sacrificing your own peace just to avoid disappointing someone else. You're becoming more intentional about the people you allow into your life. You appreciate honesty more than empty promises. You value consistency more than temporary excitement. You understand that healthy relationships are built through mutual effort rather than one person carrying everything alone. That's not becoming cold. That's becoming emotionally wise. Don't scroll, because your heart deserves to hear something beautiful. There is nothing weak about loving deeply. The world sometimes mistakes gentleness for vulnerability, but genuine compassion requires extraordinary courage. It takes courage to remain kind after disappointment. It takes courage to trust again after heartbreak. It takes courage to believe that healthy love still exists even after experiencing confusion. If you've managed to protect your heart without allowing it to become bitter, you've already accomplished something remarkable. Listen to this. There are moments when reflection changes everything. Someone may suddenly remember how often you encouraged them to believe in themselves. They may remember the way you noticed small details everyone else ignored. They may remember feeling accepted around you without having to pretend to be someone they weren't. Those memories don't necessarily rewrite the past, but they can reshape how someone understands it. They begin recognizing that what they once considered ordinary was actually rare. Don't scroll, because it's easy to assume that silence means indifference. But silence can have many meanings. Sometimes people stay silent because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Sometimes they're still processing emotions they don't fully understand. Sometimes they simply need time to become honest with themselves before they can be honest with anyone else. While silence should never become an excuse for unhealthy behavior, it also isn't always proof that nothing meaningful existed. Human emotions are often far more complicated than they appear from the outside. Listen to this, if you've been noticing moments that encourage you to pause. Whether it's seeing repeating numbers like 111 or 444, hearing a meaningful song at just the right moment, or simply feeling drawn toward reflection, let those moments remind you to reconnect with yourself. They don't have to predict your future to be meaningful. Sometimes they simply encourage you to slow down, breathe, and appreciate how far you've already come. Your healing deserves just as much attention as your hopes. Don't scroll. Because your future shouldn't be built entirely around waiting for another person's next move. The healthiest chapter of your life begins when your own growth becomes your greatest priority. Imagine waking up every morning with peace instead of anxiety. Imagine making decisions from confidence instead of fear. Imagine loving someone one day without feeling like you have to lose yourself in order to keep them. That's the direction your journey is moving toward, and every lesson you've learned has been preparing you for it. Listen to this. Perhaps the most unexpected part of this story isn't that someone may begin seeing your value more clearly. Perhaps the greatest surprise is that you'll eventually stop needing their recognition to believe in yourself. That's when everything changes. Because confidence built from within cannot be taken away by another person's choices. It becomes the foundation for every healthy relationship, every new opportunity, and every peaceful season waiting ahead. Don't scroll, because we're getting closer to the turning point. There is a moment approaching when honesty becomes easier than avoidance, when clarity becomes stronger than confusion, and when both hearts have grown enough to see the past through completely different eyes. Whether that leads to a meaningful conversation, a quiet sense of gratitude, or simply a deeper understanding of what this journey has taught, one thing is certain: you didn't walk through this season for nothing. Listen to this, because the next chapter is where emotions become actions, where reflection begins influencing real decisions, and where the courage to face the truth finally becomes stronger than the fear of what that truth might reveal. And when that moment arrives, nothing will feel quite the same again.